Hyde Pine class. It is Tuesday afternoon and we're about to start chapter 10 of Danny the Champion of the World, and chapter 10 is called The Great Shooting Party, and it's another long chapter, so we'll read half of it today and half of it tomorrow. As soon as the doctor had driven away from the filling station, I went into the office and got out the sign that said, "Sorry, closed." I hung it on one of the pumps. Then I headed straight for the caravan. I was too tired to undress. I didn't even take off my dirty old sneakers. I just flopped down on the bunk and went to sleep. The time was 5 minutes past 8 in the morning. More than 10 hours later, at 6:30 in the evening, I was woken up by the ambulance men bringing my father back from the hospital. They carried him into the caravan and laid him on the lower bunk. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Hello, Danny. How are you feeling?" "A bit woozy," he said, and he dozed off almost immediately. As the ambulance men drove away, Doc Spencer arrived and went into the caravan to take a look at the patient. "He'll sleep until tomorrow morning," he said. "Then he'll wake up feeling fine." I followed the doctor out to his car. "I'm awfully glad he's home," I said. The doctor opened the car door, but he didn't get in. He looked at me very sternly and said, "When did you last have something to eat, Danny?" "Something to eat?" I said. "Oh, well, Suddenly I realised how long it had been. I hadn't eaten anything since I had supper with my father the night before. That was nearly 24 hours ago. Doc Spencer reached into the car and came out with something huge and round, wrapped up in greaseproof paper. "My wife asked me to give you this," he said. "I think you'll like it. She's a terrific cook." Doc Spencer reached into the car and came out with something huge and round, wrapped up in greaseproof paper. He pushed the package towards me, then he jumped into the car and drove quickly away. I stood there, clasping the big round thing tightly in my hands. I watched the doctor's car as it went down the road and disappeared round the curve. After a while, I turned and walked back up the steps into the caravan with my precious parcel. I placed it in the centre of the table, but I didn't unwrap it. My father lay on the bunk in a deep sleep. He was wearing hospital pyjamas. They had brown and blue stripes. I went over and gently pulled back the blanket to see what they'd done to him. Hard white plaster covered the lower part of his leg and the whole of his foot except for the toes. There was a funny little iron thing sticking out below his foot, presumably for him to walk on. I covered him up again and returned to the table. Very carefully, I now began to unwrap the greaseproof paper from around the doctor's present. And when I had finished, I saw before me the most enormous and beautiful pie in the world. It was covered all over, top, sides and bottom, with a rich golden pastry. I took a knife from beside the sink and cut out a wedge. I started to eat it in my fingers, standing up. It was a cold meat pie. The meat was pink and tender with no fat or gristle in it, and there were hard-boiled eggs buried like treasures in several different places. The taste was absolutely fabulous. When I'd finished the first slice, I cut another, and I ate that too. God bless Dr. Spencer, I thought, and God bless Mrs. Spencer as well. The next morning, a Monday, my father was up at 6 o'clock. "I feel great," he said. He started hobbling round the caravan to test his leg. "It hardly hurts at all," he cried. "I can walk you to school." "No," I said, "no. I've never missed one yet, Danny." "It's 2 miles away," I said. "Don't do it, Dad." So that day I went to school alone, but he insisted on coming with me the next day, and I couldn't stop him. He put a woolen sock over his plaster foot to keep his toes warm, and there was a hole in the underneath of the sock so that the metal thing could poke through. He walked a bit stiff-legged, but he moved as fast as ever, and the metal thing went clink on the road each time he put it down. And so life at the filling station returned to normal. Or anyway, nearly to normal. I say nearly because things were definitely not quite the same as they had been before. The difference lay in my father. A change had come over him. It wasn't a big change, but it was enough to make me certain that something was worrying him quite a lot. He would brood a good deal, and there'd be silences between us, especially at supper time. Now and again I'd see him standing alone and very still out in front of the filling station, gazing up the road in the direction of Hazel's Wood. Many times I wanted to ask him what the trouble was, and had I done so, I'm sure he would have told me at once. In any event, I knew that sooner or later I'd hear all about it. I hadn't long to wait. About 10 days after his return from hospital, the two of us were sitting out on the platform of the caravan, watching the sun go down behind the big trees on the top of the hill across the valley. We'd had our supper, but it wasn't my bedtime yet. The September evening was warm and beautiful and very still. "You know what makes me so hopping mad?" he said to me all of a sudden. "I get up in the mornings feeling pretty good. Then about 9 o'clock every single day of the week, that huge silver Rolls Royce comes swishing past the filling station, and I see the great big bloated face of Mr. Victor Hazel behind the wheel. I always see it, I can't help it. And as he passes by, he always turns his head in my direction and looks at me. But it's the way he looks at me that's so infuriating. There's a sneer under his nose and a smug little smirk around his mouth. And although I only see him there for 3 seconds, it makes me madder than mackerel. What's more, I stay mad for the rest of the day." "I don't blame you," I said. A silence fell between us. I waited to see what was coming next. "I'll tell you something interesting," he said at last. "The shooting season for pheasants starts on Saturday. Did you know that?" "No, Dad, I didn't." "It always starts on the 1st of October, he said, and every year Mr. Hazel celebrates the occasion by giving a grand opening day shooting party." I wondered what this had to do with my father being madder than a mackerel, but I knew for certain there'd be a connection somewhere. It's a very famous event, Danny, that shooting party of Mr. Hazel's. That's where we're going to stop for today, and we'll find out tomorrow what Danny's father thinks about that shooting party of Mr. Hazel's.